Right, so in this video I'm going to look at the econ1 multiple choice paper for the summer of 2012. I'm going to run through each question and try and explain the right answer and why the other options are wrong. And while you're using it, I'd suggest you listen, stop, rewind, forward wind, use it however's useful to you. Question 1. If we go back to the first or second lesson of your AS level, the central purpose of economic activity, you have to think about the key economic problem, and really it's the satisfaction of needs and wants. Question 2 introduces the notion of market failure. So the diagram puts both marginal cost curves and marginal benefit curves on, so it's more complex than you tend to use in your written answers. And it's a question of trying to work out what's the social optimal. So, what's going to improve the resource allocation compared with the market outcome? So the market will always consider, from this point here, the private cost and the private benefits. Well, in order to improve the position, we need to look for the social optimum, and the social optimum is at this point up here. So if we consider the options at this point here, we've got a lower level of output at a higher price. So the answer is C. Question 3, simple demand and supply. First thing I would do before reading the question is just indicate to myself that the demand curve is shifting to the right. Now I read the question, the diagram below shows the supply and demand curves for a normal good. So if we link normal good to the concept of income elasticity of demand, once I've identified its income elasticity of demand, the answer must be in relation to the income of buyers increasing, causing an increase in demand, shift to the right. Question 4 is difficult and it tests your understanding of rearranging an equation. So the difficulty is rearranging the equation without numbers. So the question says to calculate the percentage change in quantity supplied of a good, so we're trying to find out this element here, following a change in its price, the price elasticity of demand should be. So effectively what we're having to do is bring that part of the equation over to the left hand side. So in order to do that, we're going to have to multiply both sides by percentage change in price. So the answer is C. Question 5 is a more straightforward calculation. So in this question we're being asked to work out the YED value from given information. So in an economy where average incomes have fallen by 5%, so we've got a -5 on the bottom, it's seen demand for holidays fall by 20%, so 20 over 5. The important thing here is that the two negatives cancel each other out. So the YED in this instance is +4, so the answer is A. Question 6 is reasonably straightforward. It's about the issue of a monopoly as a market failure, and monopolies are always less efficient than competitive markets, and the key problem with monopoly is that they're less efficient if prices are higher and output is lower. Question 7, I've simply added a production possibility frontier, PPF on the right hand side, and productive efficiency always exists along the PPF, so any point along this PPF. So looking at the options, productive efficiency can only happen when you can't get a better outcome. So the answer is D, because anywhere along that line I can only produce more of one by giving up more of the other. Question 8, always highlight the keywords in the question. So it's about a subsidy. We know a subsidy will shift the supply curve to the right, so to increase supply. The subsidy per unit is always a vertical distance, and when we're at the new level of output F, the vertical distance is the distance FG or GF, so in this instance the answer is C. The equilibrium in economics is a stable state, so demand and supply, that equilibrium position is stable until something changes, so it's nothing to do with change. It doesn't always increase when demand rises because you might get different price elasticities, and there's no excess at the equilibrium, so the answer is the market clearing price, and that's the definition of an equilibrium price. Question 10, straightforward, facts of production. So we know there are 4 facts of production, but specifically land. So if we look at these options here, there isn't anything that looks like land, but land includes raw materials. So fish in the ocean would be regarded as the factor land. Question 11, don't misread it. It talks about government failure rather than market failure. And one of the major problems that results in a government failure is the fact that sometimes the cost of the policy can actually be higher than the market failure that's being corrected. So the answer is A. 12 is a lovely test of both numeracy and your ability to apply knowledge. So in this instance, applying price elasticity of demand to the data that you've got over here. First of all, I'm calculating the percentage change in quantity demanded on the x-axis down here. So it's 5 is the difference over the starting point, which was 15, which gives me a percentage change in quantity demanded of 33.3%. My next stage is to work out percentage change in price, which is a difference of £5 probably, over a starting value, because that corresponded with the first equilibrium of 20. So 5 over 20 times 100 gives me a percentage change of 25%. Starting to look a bit messy now, but that's what you need to do on exam papers. So I've just added on in blue my final calculation, which is 33.3% divided by 25%, which, if you do the calculation, gives you an answer of a coefficient of 1.33, giving the answer of B. Complex question because you've had to do a whole number of calculations to get that one answer, but this is the direction the examiner is moving in. 13 is understanding a definition, so composite demand, and I've noticed in the last 2 years the examiners have been starting to test more complex definitions. So composite demand is a good that has multiple uses. So if we look through the options, the answer where there are multiple uses is bricks for building houses and for building factories. 14 goes back to your first or second lesson of the term, looking at production possibility frontiers. So the only combination of goods and services that cannot be achieved is Z. All the others are possible, although of course Y is inefficient, but it is possible. So the answer is C. In question 15, positive externalities are those that the market doesn't read, so it's to do with the social side of economic activity. So if we look through the option, it can't be A. This isn't relevant, C. And if it's a positive externality, it won't be to do with social costs exceeding private costs. So the answer is B. 16 is probably the easiest question on the paper. That a market failure arises when firms don't deal with externalities. Just as a side point, when firms make a loss, and sometimes when firms go out of business, that's the market working. This question then is to do with maximum pricing, which is one of the government interventions available, sometimes used in the housing market for rental housing, but it doesn't always produce the desired result. So if we read the statement, an increase in incomes causes demand curve to shift from D1 to D2, but in an effort to prevent the price from rising, the government ensures that the price cannot go above this price here, which we're going to call the maximum price. So the market wants to reach that new equilibrium, but it isn't allowed to reach that equilibrium, so we remain at this price here. So there's going to be a disequilibrium of this distance, and the supply available is at X, but the demand at that price is Z. So the answer is there's unsatisfied demand created by this policy, and that might be classed as a government failure. Question 18, the first thing I would do, as I've just done, is draw a simple diagram by the side just to help me focus on the question. Let's go through the options. All other things being equal, supply curve slopes upward from left to right because higher prices lead to higher costs. Well, that's nonsense because that's the wrong way around. Lower prices lead to higher output. Well, actually, if lower prices lead to higher output, the supply curve would look like that, which clearly cannot be true. Lower prices lead to higher demand. Again, that cannot be true because this is a question about supply. So why do firms increase the level of quantity supplied as price goes up? Because it allows them to achieve higher profits. So the answer is D. 19 is another interesting question because it requires you to think about the diagram. So I've drawn a sketch diagram by the side just to try and explain how I'm going to work this one out. The question again is about a minimum price, so it's a government intervention, and this time the government is imposing a minimum price at £9. Now the reason I've drawn the equilibrium at £8 is because I know from this information in the table that at £8 there is an equilibrium. The two values are the same. At the £9 minimum price, we've actually got quantity supplied greater than quantity demanded. So we've got a difference there of 4,000 units that the government will need to buy, and that corresponds with this point on my diagram. And each of those units that it buys, so it's buying this difference here, they're paying £9 per unit because that's the minimum price. So if you do the simple calculation, the total cost of that action is £36,000. So the answer is D. Here's a simple sketch to answer this particular question. So why do UK governments provide education? Remember, education is a merits good rather than a public good because it can be provided by the market, but the private gains from education are less than the social benefit. So if it's provided in the market, we're at point A. With government intervention, we can be moved to point B. So the answer is A. Another government intervention question, but read it very carefully. So in this instance, it's a minimum price, and usually a minimum price is used to help the producers, and in this case, it's the producers of sugar. So the government's imposing a minimum price of P1, which is at a disequilibrium. However, the market sets an equilibrium price up here at P1, Q1. So actually, the minimum price in this instance is irrelevant. So the answer is A. 22. Again, you can see I've added some information onto the diagram. I've sketched it on. So the demand is the same as the marginal private benefit. And the statement tells me that there's a misallocation because the consumption creates a positive externality. So it's a positive externality in consumption, which is to do with the benefits. So what I'm doing is showing it in this way. So in order to reach an optimal, a social optimal, we need to move to that point up there. So the answer is that more of that good should be supplied. Question 23, approach it by elimination really. So price elasticity of demand for petrol is positive. Well, that's clearly not true. There's always a positive cross elasticity of demand between petrol and demand for car journeys. Well, again, that's not true because that would suggest they're substitutes, and they're not. They're complements. Option A is not true because although there's a link between petrol and car journeys, the link isn't in terms of the supply, it's in terms of the demand. So actually this clearly illustrates that the market's working, and one of the functions of the price mechanism is to ration resources. So the answer is C. 24 is about efficiency. So reducing the unit cost of production and efficiency. The only option relating to efficiency here is specialisation. Final question, 25. Again, the 9th question to do with market failure on the paper. So market failure results in a misallocation of resources. Well, again, go through the options. How do you correct it? Well, the first option is nonsense. How would subsidising loss-making firms correct market failure? Taxing merit goods would not correct market failure. So actually, one of the things that governments can do to correct market failure is provide public goods where there is a missing market. Hopefully you found this useful. Again, what I suggest is keep going back, revisiting these, find the question that you find difficult, listen to the answer, rewind, go back again. It's all about practicing for the exams in the summer. And best of luck.